on today's Story Beat.
I would send Yoko, Paul, George, and Ringo copies of the magazine religiously. As soon as it came out, I would send them a free copy. Years later, Linda McCartney said to me, "Charles, thank you so much. We read them and love them." Years after that, Ringo donated a large chunk of his memorabilia collection to a fundraising auction. And one of the lots was his collection of Good Day Sunshines, which meant they didn't go into the paper shredder.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm truly delighted to chat with Charles Rosenay for the second time on StoryBeat. Charles has been in the entertainment business for over 4 decades as an actor, promoter, music aficionado, entertainer, MC, DJ, humorist, and author. Recently, he released his latest book, The Book of Top 10 Beatles Lists, which contains dozens of top 10 lists from pop culture notables like Pete Best, Dick Cavett, Tommy Chong, Melanie, and even Dave Winfield, all laying out their favorite songs by the Beatles, who are, for me, the greatest rock band of all time. Among all of his other accomplishments, Charles has produced Beatles Conventions and Festivals since 1978, and he's been the organizer and host of the Magical History Tour since 1983, bringing Beatles fans to Liverpool and London. Charles published and edited the magazine Good Day Sunshine, one of the world's most famous Beatles 60s magazines. He's also promoted Monkees conventions since the early 80s. As an MC, Charles has shared the stage with countless entertainment figures, including Charles Grodin, Geraldo Rivera, and the late Danny Aiello. For the record, I was part of a group that Charles led on an outstanding Dracula tour of Transylvania. Charles also leads ghost tours in England. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm truly happy to welcome my friend, the multi-talented Charles Rosenay, back to StoryBeat today. Charles, welcome to the show.
And we're out of time. Thank you and good night.
And good night. Have a nice night.
I love it. You included so much. I forgot all those things I did.
You've done too much already. So slow down, will you?
No,
never.
No way.
So when in your life did you first take note of the Beatles and 60s rock and roll?
I got to tell you, my first memory in life, when I put out the horror book, the book of top 10 horror list, I would say my first memory in life was seeing Bride of Frankenstein with my mom. And I would tell the story of how she talked me into seeing it. But as I was working on the Beatle book, I said, wait, no, that's not true. The Beatles on Ed Sullivan, February 9th, 1964. That was my first memory. And that was the most world-changing, awe-inspired. This is the one that made my life in the direction it's been. That was it. They arrived in America on February 7th, 64, and they played the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964. And I was watching it as, every other little pisher was like, I wanted to see Topo Gigio, who would come on and say, "Kiss me, Eddie.
Eddie, kiss me."
And instead, there was these guys who sang song after song, and wow, that was it. I was gobsmacked.
Well, there's almost no doubt anymore that they literally changed culture and society. Just that one act, just coming on the Ed Sullivan Show, changed everything forward.
Correct. It wasn't just the music. It was on so many levels, and it never happened again. And it was just the stars aligned. The stars aligned on so many levels, with the music being great, the songwriting being great, their personalities, the 4 of them clicking the way they did. Well, I think once in a millennium, once in ever, and that was them.
Well, I can for sure say, and I'm kind of dating myself like you, but I watched that show that night too. I saw the Beatles that night too, and it was like, holy mackerel.
Yeah.
They really did something just absolutely special and outstanding. Of course, it was years later that the Monkees came around, sort of as an answer to the Beatles. Yes. And did you then immediately fall in love with them too?
I'll tell you why I did. because I was still young and I still listened to AM radio. And I thought that Pepper, was too sophisticated. I mean, I remember picking up the album and saying, wait, I don't know any of these songs. There's no hits. So I gravitated towards, the Monkees' first album and more of them. And they were on TV and they had so many of the elements of the Beatles in that they had personality and they had comedy and they all sang and had great voices. So, yeah, I mean, what the difference is, everyone got over the Monkees. I didn't. I always loved them. They're always, the Beatles are at the very, very top of the echelons, and then the Monkees a little under them, and then everybody else.
Has your passion for either of them faded over time?
No, never faded. But what I find, and you'll get a kick out of this, is, I do the Dracula tours to Transylvania,
Yep.
but I also do Beatle tours to Liverpool. I've been doing that for 40 years. What happens is we go over during Beatle week. And if someone isn't as familiar, it's probably comparable to Elvis week in Memphis. But every club, every pub, you hear Beatle music 24 hours. And I got to tell you, I do not listen to Beatle music for 2 weeks before I go on the tour. And when it's done, I wean off it for about a month because I am so, oh my gosh, if I hear Come Together one more time, and there's a few certain songs that every Beatle band does, and it's Twist and Shout, it's Come Together, there's a handful. And yeah, so has it ever really fallen off my existence? No way. But I overdose on it for times, and then I have to wean off it for a little while.
Well, I have the Beatles channel on my Sirius XM
Yes.
in my car,
Right.
and I can't listen to it all the time, or I get a little burnt out on it. So I will very selectively find days where, okay, I'll listen to the Beatles now,
Yeah.
as opposed to every day, because most of the other channels I listen to, it's always refreshing with different songs.
Yeah.
But it's like anything else in life. Too much of a good thing is too much. So what is it about the Beatles that makes them so fascinating? Why the Beatles?
First Beatle convention I ever produced was in the late 70s. And people thought, all right, how long is this going to last? I mean, and I came up with my pat answer. And what is it? It's the 3 M's. And even in the 70s, it applies now, 50 years later. It's the music, which is the above all. It starts and ends with the music. And then it's the memories, the nostalgia factor for people who might have lived through it, or maybe lived through it through older siblings or parents. I mean, it's multi-generational now. Beatles Festival, it's original fans or the grandparents or the great grandparents. It's their kids. So that's the M, the memories. But the last M it's the magic, Steve. It's the X factor. No one can explain that, and no one could put their finger on. Maybe it was the haircuts. Maybe it was the smiles and the personality. Maybe it was the trousers. Maybe it was something, who knows? But it was definitely something that, why were they different than the Dave Clark Five and the Rolling Stones and the Hermits and the Kinks, and you go on forever, and these are all amazing, great bands with great songs, but the Beatles were above it all, and that's because of the magic of the Beatles.
Well, here's the thing. I think that for whatever reason, and of course it is a mystery, a true mystery, they are still beyond everybody to this day. That they're still ahead of their time. They're ahead of our time still.
Well, maybe that's the 4th M, the mystery. Because yes, they still are. And you know how the world couldn't wait for this new record. It was just so amazing. I was doing interview after interview just on a song because it was so special to so many people. Yeah.
Do you consider yourself to be a Beatles historian at this point?
Yes. I've stayed away from expert historian, archivist, stayed away from all those levels. I'm a super fan. I don't take that. There's a difference between a Beatle fan and fanatic. And I guess I'm fanatic in my love for them and in my, how long, 50, 40, whatever years of promoting their music and keeping their spirit alive. But yeah, I think however you want to do this categorization, it starts with Beatle fan / Beatle author / Beatle producer / and I never would put historian or expert or any of those, because I know so many people who are so much more knowledgeable than I am and who I would defer to if I had questions.
So speaking of that, because of you, I had the good graces to have Mike Byrne on the show.
Oh yeah.
Mike and Bernadette Byrne, who are the creators of the Beatles Story exhibition in Liverpool.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, he's been on the podcast. What would you say it is about Mike and Bernadette that makes them special? And I think I know the answer, but you tell me.
There's a bunch of answers to that. First of all, I mean, Bernie dated George Harrison. My God, there's pictures of her sitting in the cavern just watching them play. So she was there. She has, that's credibility. Mike was part of that scene. He played in Mersey bands when the Beatles, were playing a cavern and they were playing New Brighton and all these great clubs. Mike was in the next club over, or he was opening, and so he lived it and breathed it. But what he did is just so special in that he brought to Liverpool what is one of the world's greatest tourist attractions. I mean, he created the Beatles story. And for people who don't know, it's not just a museum, it's an exhibition where you room after room, the Beatles actually, you live and breathe it. And I remember when he was first building it, and he brought me to this dingy little warehouse on the Albert Docks of Liverpool. And I don't want to go as far as saying it was rat infested, but I was afraid to walk around. I didn't want to get my sneakers, embedded in mud and all that. And he said, okay. And he put like a hole in the ground to be the Brian Epstein room. This will eventually be John Lennon's white room. And he had it all sussed out. He knew what it was going to be before there was even excavation and plans. And I walked out of there and I said, oh, what they call in Liverpool are nutters, Nutters. And I thought, oh, another one of these nutters who has grand schemes. This will never happen. And within a few years, it won awards as, an amazing tourist attraction. And to this day, it's one of England, if not all of Europe's most attended and most beloved attractions. So they are so special. But beyond that, they're great people. They're just friends, and you find that in so many things we do, whether it's the books or movies or rock and roll, that just so many of these people are they're fans first. And then, they just happen to have gotten into different roles in this world. But, when it comes back down to it, what's her favorite memory? It'll probably be, going to a movie with George or going to see the cavern with them on stage.
It's got to seem like a dream to her at this point.
Yes, because so much. I mean, I try to remember stuff pre-marriage or pre-college and all that, or my parents were alive and all that. It's another world. It's a different life. And, when you look back on that, I think as so many more things happen, and as I lost brain cells when I had kids, I'm so glad I kept clippings and photos and everything else, because people said, yeah, Charles, don't you remember when you went? I'm like, no, did that really happen? And then we see photos and it's like, oh yeah, I guess I was there.
So what then triggered you to decide to do tours to Liverpool with tourists?
Well, okay, so the first thing I did was a Beatles convention, and that was in the late 70s, because I think I was in high school and I was a gopher. I got a job gophering at a theater, a kung fu porn movie theater, but it was one of those old grand gals in New Haven. It was the Roger Sherman Theater, held 1,600 people, and it went into such a bad disarray of falling apart. But a promoter came from out of town and was going to turn it into a live theater and had this whole Broadway series, and all these acts were going to be there. And I heard about it. So I said, let me see if I can get a job there. And he brought me in and he said, you will be my executive producer. Now, this guy was smart, because by giving me a title, I lived there. I was there back and forth every minute I could be. Associate producer was actually the title he gave me, but it was a glorified gopher. I'd run out and get his coffee, and I'd get the mail, and I'd answer the door. And when people called for him, I had to make up excuses. And within, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, he was out of town. He fled town, leaving this theater with a lot of debt and only 2 shows under its belt. And so I was there answering questions and trying my best to cover up for this guy who I loved, but, didn't do all the right things. And Steve, I learned then what not to do in show business.
Which is?
So I learned that you don't use the money that you may get from one show to pay for the next 4 shows in case the next 4 shows bomb and then you don't. I just a lot of things like that, simple things that really would make sense to someone when you hear it, but you don't think about it when you're in that business. And what we did do though is I wanted to do a Beatles convention really badly because there were conventions in New York and in Boston, and I guess there were in Chicago and LA and other areas too. And I thought, well, I'm in Connecticut. I'm a Beatles fan. Why don't I bring one to Connecticut? Not knowing what it entailed. And he said, sure, we'll put the vendors in the lobby. We'll show some movies. But of course, he fled town and the theater closed. So here I was with the hopes of doing a Beatles convention. And I thought, I'll bring it to a little hotel. And I did. And that was 78. It bombed, but I learned again how to improve. I think that's a big thing is, if you fall, you get back up and you find ways. And the ways I found is my parents helped me finance the first one. I had to finance the second one by selling my Beatles Butcher cover or my memorabilia. And it worked because by the second show, I did it in a college and it went to the next level. And a few years later, I thought, all these people are writing to me. These were days where you wrote to each other. And I was getting letters from Oshkosh and all over the place. Hey, can you please bring a Beatles convention to my town and all this? Well, I couldn't do that, obviously. But what I found is I was writing hundreds of letters a week. I was getting in hundreds of letters. I was answering letters because that's the only way we corresponded. You weren't going to use the phone to call Chicago because that was a long distance phone call. You weren't going to, there was no internet, there was no computer, there was no emails. So the stamps, one, were killing me. But I thought if I did a newsletter, well, I could answer so many of these questions in my newsletter. And if I'm doing conventions, maybe this newsletter could promote the conventions, and then the conventions could promote people to want to get in the newsletter. So in 1980-81, I started a magazine called Good Day Sunshine.
Right.
In those days, they called them fanzines, but this was a real magazine. This was a real 80 pages, sometimes 90, 100 pages. And I was putting it out very regularly because predecessors were putting out similar fanzines, and it was whenever they could, 3 times a year, twice a month, and then not for 9 months, that kind of thing. I was determined to put it out every other month and did. We put out 6 issues a year for going on 20 years. And around 1983, the magazine was successful. The conventions were growing. I was contacted by a friend in the Beatle business who was also a travel agent and said, hey, if I put together a tour to Liverpool, would you host it? Would I host it? I'm thinking, this is Liverpool. This is the Holy Land, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, absolutely. And I through Good Day Sunshine, through the Beatles magazine, 20, 30, 40 people signed up to be with me on this tour. And it was so successful that 40 years later, last year, we celebrated our 40th anniversary with a recording session inside Abbey Road Studios.
Wow.
Yeah. And then around 84, don't forget the Beatles' 20th anniversary. We think now it's the 60th. Oh my God. It was the 20th anniversary. I was at that point getting to the level where I was being called by promoters, hoteliers. It wasn't fans saying, please bring this convention to St. Louis. It was the venue saying, we'd like to have a convention in Detroit. Will you come out and produce it? So in 84, I produced one at the Omni in Miami, and it drew 55,000 people.
Wow.
Which is, I think to this day is probably a record for the most, well, because I was going to Liverpool and really great people like Pete Bell's first drummer, and Cynthia Lennon, John's wife, she should rest in peace. Alan Williams, the Beatles' first manager, on and on and on and on. I was then bringing them back to America because we became friends and they were guests at my conventions. So everything was feeding off each other. There was the conventions, which were promoting my magazine and my tours. There was the magazine, which was promoting the conventions and tours. And then there was the tours, which was the only thing making money at the time. And I started it just to get a free vacation. I said, this is great. I want to go to Liverpool I will do this and I will host it. Well, I'm putting a lot of work into this. I might as well, raise my cost about $50 or $100. And I started, making that. That was about the only thing. The conventions were hit and miss. The magazine, forget about that, lost money. That was a labor of love. But the tours started doing well. And so everything sort of fit together. And it's really funny because at that time, and this is probably going to lead to your next question, but I'll circumvent it here. People would say, hey, Charles, when are you doing a book? Because they figured that all the guests I interviewed at these conventions, or all my memories of Liverpool, or all the, how to produce a Beatles convention, they thought that would make a great book. Firstly, in those days, my answer was, well, I published Good Day Sunshine for nearly 20 years. I was putting out 6 books a year.
Right.
I am never putting a book together in my life, putting it out in time, putting that much sweat and love. And in those days, it was typewriters. Don't forget, we were like,
yes, indeed,
word processors.
I remember quite well.
I hand addressed close to 5,000 envelopes every month, every other month to get these out, because we didn't have, computers then. So I said I would never do a book.
Did you think all the way back then that you would still be doing it 40 years later?
I don't think anyone thinks in those terms,
Well, did you think you'd be doing it for a while, or did you think this is it? I'm doing it once and that's it.
Oh. So the tours, I didn't know if that was a one shot. That's about the only thing that I didn't look in the future. Conventions, I thought, well, yeah, as long as they're successful, as long as there's fans who want to go. We did Seattle, I did Detroit, I did upstate New York. So I was at a point where I thought it would grow and grow and grow, and more and more and more places. I thought I had a little cottage industry with that, not realizing that other people were astute enough that if they wanted to, they could also produce conventions in their areas.
Well, sure. That's indeed. You did figure out at some point that it was a good thing to keep doing, though. Yes, clearly.
Absolutely. But having said all that, from about the age of 16 and 17, I had a real job. I was a DJ. I DJ'd bar mitzvahs and weddings and school dances and you name it. And in fact, tonight when we're done, I'm actually driving out to a town called Westport, which is about a half hour from me.
Right.
And I'm going to be DJing a nightclub because they're having a Chinese New Year celebration. So to this day, that's my bread and butter. If a conventions stop, if, I don't do any more tours, I mean, don't forget, COVID hit and I couldn't DJ. I couldn't do tours. I couldn't do the conventions. Everything was very affected by that. So that's been pretty much my livelihood. That's kept me afloat when a convention bombed.
Do you still love it?
I still love it. You put me in front of an audience, I know that I will have them either dancing or laughing or smiling or singing along. I'm not a DJ, I'm an MC. There's a big difference.
So what's the difference? Tell the listeners what the difference is.
A chimp could press buttons and be a DJ. And that's no knock to DJs because they put on the headphones and mix the beats, and there's a talent and an art to that. But what you can't teach and what you can't pass on to somebody, and I've tried and I've come close a few times, is personality, is how to make a crowd laugh and have fun beyond just dance. And, the people who do that are very in demand, and I've been doing that for a long time. I know that if I walk into any crowd, if they're 15 years old or if they're 115-year-old, I know that I will walk out and they will say, thank you, we had such a good time.
Are you able to craft different evenings for different reasons, like different events?
Absolutely. I mean, one might be an oldies night, one might be all rap and hip hop, one might be a rave dance club stuff. Obviously, I prefer it if I'm playing the older stuff, but I'll play whatever the crowd wants. I mean, a wedding, a typical wedding is everything. It's a mix of generations. So, yeah.
I'm going to bet you've never done an evening of Gregorian chants.
Oh, I did that last night, of course. No, I've never done an evening of Gregorian chants.
So, all right, let's talk about the book of top 10 Beatles lists.
Yeah.
Where did this idea come from? Did it come after the top 10 horror book list?
Right. Well,
I said that all wrong, didn't I? It's the top 10
horror lists and the book of top 10 Beatle lists. And one, of course, led to the other. But if you recall, I think I explained that having said I would never write a book in my life,
Yes.
that changed because of COVID. I was,
Hmm.
on the treadmill. I'm watching horror movies with my kids. I'm thinking, what can I do? I'm going crazy, not being able to do conventions, not being able to DJ, not doing the tours. All the things I do, I can't do. And it's COVID-19 and I'm gaining 19 pounds. I got to figure out how to, get the brain and everything else stimulated. And that's when I realized I was going to put together the book of top 10 horror lists. And I thought, okay, this is going to make everyone happy. It's got 9 Beatle chapters. It's got 7 Monkee chapters. It will appeal to everyone. It did. It did. It appealed to people who love horror, people who love pop culture and celebrities. But those Beatle people said, Charles, how dare you not have a first book as a Beatles book? And literally, it's like, how dare you? I thought, well, wait a second. The book of top 10 horror list was so much fun. And it's not me sitting and having to write fiction and having to put together a story. And if I don't think I'm disciplined enough to do that. I thought, well, wait a second. If I did 100 celebrities who gave me their top 10 horror lists, I can go back to the well. I can, ask some of them and ask a bunch of other people. And I thought it'd be so easy to put together a book of top 10 Beatle lists, but it was no longer COVID. So the rock stars were out gigging again. All the actors, they were out doing movies, and the athletes were back playing ball. So this was a tougher nut to crack here.
How long did it take you to put the top 10 horror list together?
The book of top 10 horror list, from when I first got one list till it came out, was 12 years.
Is that all? Just 12 years?
Yeah, but it was never supposed to be a book. When I realized that I had all these celebrity interviews that had top 10 lists, it was pretty much 2 years from beginning to end. The Beatle book was pretty similar, but I didn't do 100. I stopped at that magic number of 64, of course, when the Beatles arrived in America. What I did is a little more thought out. The horror book was any celebrity I could find, blah, blah, blah.
Including yours truly. You actually had me do a list.
Well, because of your, filmmaking history.
Well, because I made a movie called Lucky that's definitely a weird, twisted horror movie. But you had asked me, which was very interesting because you got to give me the right answer. I gave you that list years ago.
Correct.
It wasn't near the publishing of the book. It was many years before. And I said, great. So I gave you the list. And then years later, here comes this book.
Well, you didn't give it to me, and I didn't have the intent of it ever being in a book. Back then, Good Day Sunshine, the Beatle magazine, had ended, and the internet had happened. And I felt doing Dracula tours and Beatle tours had my audience for the Beatles. Was no problem. Good Day Sunshine, gave me tons of publicity, what else? But I didn't think I had enough ways to reach out to horror people. And I wasn't going to start a horror fanzine. I wasn't going to do a magazine. So online, I did something called National Horror Happenings. It was a newsletter, once a week or once daily, whenever it hit me. If I saw a horror movie, I reviewed it. If I heard of a new movie coming out, I put it in there. If I had a chance to interview a star for whatever reason, I put that in. So that was really fun, but it only like 5 or 6 eyeballs. and then I did a top 10 list, and all of a sudden there was 1,000 clicks. And I was like, wait, that's why David Letterman does top 10 lists, because people love top 10 lists. Started doing it once a month, and it got the biggest numbers. So I said, let's do it once a week. And I'll ask everyone I know, even with the faintest or remotest connection to horror or in the show business, because we were friends and knew each other. And I knew how, with the film Lucky, I asked you for a list, and that went into that. That was online at National Horror Happenings. When COVID hit, I realized I had 70 of those lists. And therefore, all I needed was another 20 or so more. And that's how that book came out.
So the horror book just sort of came around just out of happenstance. There was no intention to put the book together at all. But the Beatles book you intended to write.
Very, very big difference, right? The first one was a matter of me going crazy and needing something to do. And then, thank God, this was on a database that wasn't erased. And I had all those lists. I think 2 lists disappeared. But of the others, literally 70 lists, and they were great. People like Ed Asner, William Shatner, so many of people, who would never do it maybe now or are no longer with us. So yeah, that was definitely without intent to ever do a book. but I was very fortunate to have that. And I say I'm a great compiler. So I took the lists, I wrote bios for them all, I put in great photos for them all, and then it all made sense. The Beatle book followed the same pattern. I mean, you look at the covers, one of them is surrounded by all these horror classic, icons. The Beatle book is similar formatted with artwork, by the way. It's not
Right.
photo.
Right.
The great artist Shannon did that. I thought, well, if I follow the same pattern of the bios for everything, but what was different about this one is I had a thought that I wanted to appeal to Beatle fans, absolutely, but I wanted, like the horror book, for it to be of general interest to pop culture people, people who love celebrity, people who love top 10 lists. So a third of it is Beatle connections, Beatle relatives, Beatle people who played with them, people who toured with them, relatives, all that. One third of it is rock and rollers, people in the Vanilla Fudge, in the Cars, in this band, in that band. And then a third of it is just general celebrities, actors, actresses, athletes who had no Beatles connection aside from being able to come up with a kick-ass Beatles list.
Were these all people you knew?
Most were. Some, I happened to come across an email, or they were appearing at a local dinner theater or whatever. I go to a lot of conventions. So I was it's called Chiller Theater, but it's not a horror convention anymore. It's in New Jersey. And who was signing autographs but Larry Thomas, the soup Nazi from Seinfeld? Sweetheart of a guy. We hit it off. We talked. And I said, I don't know if this would interest you, but I did a book of top 10 horror lists. I may do a sequel someday, but I've got a Beatle. Oh, he goes, I love the Beatles. I go, would you be interested? Before I finished my sentence, he said, yes. What can I do to be in the book? I said, oh, I would love a top 10 list. He goes, now what's with the horror? He gave me 2 lists overnight. He went to his hotel and worked on it overnight, gave it to me the next day. And the lists are great. The Beatle one made it into the book. And I loved it because you don't associate Larry Thomas, you don't associate the Seinfeld soup Nazi with either horror or the Beatles. But those are the ones that are really special. Tommy Chong, Cheech and Chong gave me a list. And I'm like, wow, Dick Cavett. I mean, that was reaching for me. That's reaching.
That's big.
Yes,
that's a big guy.
Yes. And, he interviewed Harrison and he interviewed John and Yoko and just Groucho. He's interviewed everybody, the ones that we didn't get to in our lives, he got to.
Was there anyone you went to that turned you down or said no?
Yeah, of course, a bunch, but some of them were very nice. I'll tell you, I worked really hard because I had seen Lin-Manuel Miranda, the great Broadway songwriter.
Hamilton and In the Heights.
Hamilton and In the Heights, of course. And I saw him at the 92nd Street Y, and he talked about loving the Beatles growing up. I said, no, can't be. Really? What did I do? I sent a letter to his manager and it never got through. Sent a letter to his agent, never got through. Sent a letter to his publicist, never got through. Found a home address and it was returned to sender. So wait, one more try. I'm not giving up. He has a bookstore in New York.
Yes, he does. It's called the Drama Bookshop, and my book is in that store.
It sure is. Whoa.
Actually, both of my books are in there, Beating Broadway and Beating Hollywood. But go on.
That's all right. Never a reason not to throw in a plug. Lin-Manuel finally got it and wrote back to me with an autograph, with a personalized letter. I'm not up for doing this, but please accept this, with my congratulations and with my comments. So that's much better than all the ones who didn't. Most of them just don't reply.
They don't reply. Sure. Well, either they don't get it or they're not interested in replying. One of the two.
I find if I get it to a manager or an agent, I'll never get a response because
of course
they get nothing out of it. They don't want their client homework.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there any lists that you did get but didn't make the cut? And you don't need to name names. Were there any that you just said, no, I'm not putting it in?
No, I got one by mistake that I didn't put in by mistake.
Oh, by mistake you didn't put it in?
Yeah, because it was a recorded one and I couldn't find, I forgot about it. And then I found the file after the book came out, and it's a Beatles contemporary, one of the major names in the British invasion, and it's Billy J. Kramer, who the Beatles wrote a bunch of songs for, and is a friend. And every time, I take pictures with him, I'm praying that he doesn't say, hey, is my chapter in the book? And fortunately, I think he's forgotten about it. And please, Billy, if you're listening to the show, I'm sorry. But ones that I might have left out, are ones where and I think there's two of them, where they just gave me a list and didn't give the reasons why. I mean, the meat of the book is not if Hey Jude was their favorite and I Want to Hold Your Hand was number two. It's why those songs were important to the people.
Well, sure. And it's the same with the horror list book as well, that it's the reasons why those things make the list.
Exactly. And what I loved, and they did it in the horror book and they did it here too, is the ones who thought outside the box. When they didn't just give their top 10 favorite songs or albums. One of them was he was on tour with the Beatles as a journalist, Larry Kane from Philadelphia, and went to every single show they did and gave me his top 10 favorite concert memories and why. Elliot Easton from the Cars, lead guitarist, he thought out of the box. He gave me their favorite middle eights.
Their favorite middle eights.
Yeah, how cool is that?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Because the Beatles were king of that. That's one of the things that a non-musician might not realize when you hear the verse of a song, you hear the chorus, but there's that bridge, that break, that something that makes it a little different. And the Beatles were kings of those. Yeah.
Would you say overall there were common themes in the list, that things just kept coming back and back?
Well, favorite songs, sure. Yeah. When you look through it, what surprised me is Eleanor Rigby made a lot of lists. And in the back of the book is I called it the toppermost of the poppermost, and it's the top 10 of the ones the celebrities picked.
Right.
And I was surprised that, the She Loves You and a lot of the early ones were not on the list. And that might have been actually a case of maybe I asked a lot of younger people as well as older people.
I think honestly, Charles, it's because the early songs, while totally memorable and completely great, are more in line with everything else that was happening at the time. And as they progressed, they started to do things that were utterly unique and still are utterly unique. And I think that's why people remember them as being the height of their career.
You're absolutely right. Because, right, those were innovative and those were groundbreaking.
So you get to Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and those kinds of songs, and they're just completely unique. And so how did you gather all those photos for the book?
So a little ego here, because when I'm gone and my kids have these books, I want them to see that Dad met most of these people. So a lot of pictures, I'm thinking, hey, I got to show pictures that have not been published. And the best way to do that was, me with this guy, me with that gal. I put a lot of photos of myself in there with some of the stars. The ones that were of albums or of 45 sleeves, that's kind of free use. That's kind of promotional stuff that you're allowed to print. And then if it was things that were really, really unique, I got permission. And the best example of that was Bernie Byrne, because there's the picture of her in the cavern watching the Beatles, and that came right from her collection.
Right. So did you try to get Paul or Ringo?
No, I didn't.
Would you have liked to have had Paul or Ringo?
Clearly, but I guess, you're the first person who's asked that. I think.
Well, they're kind of like obvious to me. They're the Beatles.
In the days that I used to publish Good Day Sunshine, I would send Yoko, Paul, George, and Ringo copies of the magazine religiously. As soon as it came out, I would send them a free copy. And I thought, oh, well, they're probably Years later, Linda McCartney said to me, Charles, thank you so much. We read them and love them, which was, wow, that was validation. And years after that, Ringo donated a large chunk of his memorabilia collection to a fundraising auction. And one of the lots was his collection of Good Day Sunshines.
Oh, wow.
Which meant they didn't go into the paper shredder.
No, he collected them.
So that was great. I didn't bother asking them for lists because that's, I think, one of the questions that they've been asked ad nauseum. What are your favorite Beatles songs? What song did you love to perform on? I would have asked them for horror lists before I asked them for a Beatles list.
They probably have their top 10 favorites, but they probably wouldn't tell you. That would be my guess.
And neither would John Lennon's sister, Julia. I asked her for a horror list in the day, and she said, Charles, I hate horror movies. I can't watch horror movies, but leave it with me. And she came up with a chapter, which was the great elements of horror in literature with a focus on Shakespeare. And I thought, wow, brilliant. I asked her for the Beatles list, and she goes, no, I can't do that. I cannot do that. If I give you, those 10, the fans will ask, why didn't I pick the other 10? If I leave out John's songs, why did I put too many Paul songs? And I said, all right, no problem. And then she came back and wrote the foreword for the book.
Oh, there you go.
So I'll take that.
You bet you will, for sure. So are you still acting?
Yeah, just actually, a film came out and I'm part of the crowd scene. It came out about a few weeks ago. I saw it in a theater, which is always a thrill. It's a horror movie called Founders Day,
Okay.
independent film, and I'm part of the crowd scene. It's the second film I did for the Bloomquist brothers. The one before that was a horror film called Night at Eagle Inn, and I play a cross-dressing debutante.
Of course you did, because that's perfectly you, Charles.
Of course, perfect stereotyping. And my kids had to take a triple look. That's really you, Dad? And my dad goes, Abba, why did you do that?
You get a kick out of acting still?
I love acting. I get a thrill out of it. I love the process. And give me a horror movie where I can just be seen for a second and be in the credits. I love that. One of my biggest roles was I played Elton John along with Patton Oswalt as Elton John in Flight of the Conchords.
Oh, really?
I was in their second season in this show called Prime Minister with Art Garfunkel. And there's two Elton John in it, and I'm one of the two.
Well, that's it. I saw that entire series, and I don't remember seeing you in it.
You would never have known. I had the hat, the glasses, the gap in my teeth. I channeled Elton very well, but yeah, you would not have known it.
All right, so I'm going to ask you an interesting question. If you could go back in time and do one thing over again to achieve a more satisfying or a better result, what do you think that would be?
In my life or
in your life? In anything from your life?
I would have learned how to play guitar.
Learned how to play guitar?
Yes, started me on accordion because that's what the kids in the Bronx had to do. And I flipped and please guitar, please Beatles, please guitar. And well, okay, so she went to a friend who had one, and it was a Spanish classical, and the neck was probably bigger than my neck. I couldn't get my fingers around it. I gave up on that. I would have been Paul in Beatlemania if I stuck with that. I would have stayed with the Beatles. I would have stayed in the world of music somehow.
Can you sing?
Well, that doesn't count, does it? Does it?
No, for the Beatles, of course it wouldn't count.
Yeah, I can't anymore, but I could have in the day, yes.
You could have in the day. Well, I am having the most marvelous conversation with Charles Rosenay, my dear friend from more than 20 years ago from Dracula Tour in Transylvania, one of the greatest trips I've ever taken and will ever take. I will tell you that. If you have any interest in Dracula or ghosts, by the way, did you ever see a ghost on the ghost tours?
I didn't, but some people did. And someone saw an amazing story on one of the Dracula tours. But the only ghosts that I've seen are in photos that I've taken. Because a book we never talked about is my second book that came in between the two top 10 lists is True Ghost Stories of Connecticut, where I piled, a lot of ghost stories. And I'm part of a paranormal team, believe it or not, called The Shaman and the Showman. The shaman is the guy who's the clairvoyant and the ghost hunter, and I'm the showman. I go out there as the skeptic, as the non-believer, and together we, explore and do a lot of fun stuff. So yeah, in answer to your question, yes, they've seen ghosts on my tours. I have never seen ghosts on my tours, but if you ever stay at the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, where we stay, every room is haunted.
Every room is haunted.
Oh yeah, oh definitely.
So, all right, you've done lots of interesting oddball things. Can you share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, oddball, strange, or just plain funny?
Endless. I was thinking in terms of the book, because getting the lists, most of them I'd gotten by email, or they wrote back to me and I had to, read their handwriting and get it. But a few of the people who were in the book said to me, I'll do it, but I'm not going to write it down. So I do, an interview. One was Joey Molland from Badfinger, who keeps the Badfinger name alive, Apple recording artist. The other one was Tommy Chong, wouldn't write it down. I had to do an interview with him. But the interesting one is, this is a quirky one, because here is this Grammy award-winning composer, wrote Aerosmith, produced everyone, produced 9 Ringo albums, and had a career of his own. Mark Hudson, he was one of the Hudson brothers.
Sure. Harry Nilsson, he produced Harry Nilsson.
He produced Harry Nilsson, is right. And he's a great guy, and he's a sweetheart, and he's funny, and he's loud, and he's colorful. And he said, yeah, Charles, I'll give you the list, but we got to sit down and, have a coffee, and I'll give it to you in person. All right. So a year and a half of, sure, Charles, whenever, well, he's on the West Coast most of the time. I'm on the East Coast. We happen to both be guests at a Beatles festival in Florida. Beatles on the beach. It's Mickey Dolenz, it's him, it's me, and we're on stage, and I say on stage, by the way, Mark Hudson, I have a Beatles book coming out, and you promised me you would give me a list to put him on the spot on stage. And he said, all right, we'll go for coffee after the interview. We'll spend 15 minutes at Starbucks. We go to Starbucks. And 3 hours later, I recorded that whole time and got a great list from him that I then had to wheedle down to, a top 10 list, but went on and on and on. When I thought about, what was different and what stood out from all the interviews of the book, that's one that really, really jumped out at me. But I will share a ghost story with you.
Sure, please.
Because as you said, we do the Dracula tours, we do the ghost tours. I've never seen a ghost on any of those. And now I'm part of a paranormal team, and I produce paranormal conventions, believe it or not. And I also put that book together, True Ghost Stories of Connecticut. And as I'm putting together this book, where I'm compiling ghost stories from other paranormal experts, and I went to them and I said, I want to know your most outstanding ghost happening. I don't want you to embellish it. I want what scared you, what was a mouth-dropping story. And they all gave it to me. And as I was compiling, I was about halfway through, I remembered that in college, I had an unbelievable experience. I was in college, and I had a buddy who was in California now, and we reunited on Facebook. And his name is Ed DiPiazza. And Ed and I were on the same college radio station. And Ed and I loved so much of the same stuff, but tangentially, I loved the Beatles, he loved the Who. I love the Monkees, he loved Springsteen. And we found common ground in that. And on the air, I would come in as the program director and say, too much Who, hello, a little more Beatles. And we would always tease each other. And we'd go out to clubs, we'd see bands, in those days, we'd go out to all the local dives. And he goes, hey, Charles, someday I got to take you to see the Pink Lady. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm not going to go to a stripper with this guy. What's the Pink Lady, Steve? I don't know what the Pink Lady is. It's, he goes, no. We're going to go. You'll love it. And he'd forgotten about it. And then he mentioned it again a few weeks later. And I'm thinking, is my mom going to be mad at me? All I'm thinking is it's not going to be the right thing if it's something called the Pink Lady. And I slough it off. All right, sure, someday. We went to see a band, and then there was a second band after them. And the second band was so loud and so unpolished. And so let's get out of here. I've had enough. And he goes, all right, you don't want to go straight home, do you? I go, no, why? He goes, we're going to go see the Pink Lady. And I'm like, oh man, how am I going to get out of this? Well, I didn't. And he took me to the seediest, probably worst neighborhood of New Haven. And he parks under a bridge and he turns off his car. And I'm like, oh, this is it. I didn't get to say goodbye to my parents. I'm never going to have children. The Beatles career is done. I'm never going to sing in Beatlemania. I'm never going to have a radio. All of these things are flashing to my mind. And he goes, Charles, I want to tell you a story. And he proceeds to tell me of this beautiful, loving couple that met. And they met and they said, this was the love of the lifetime. Everything was perfect. They got along, forever together. And they decided to buy a house in this neighborhood in the day. And they bought the house and they lived on the second floor. And the worst thing is, we plan and God laughs, and God laughed on them, and he was sent off to war. He was enlisted in World War II, the big one, and he was sent overseas, and they hugged and they kissed, and he said, I will be back. Not like Arnold, I'll be back. He said, I'll be back, and when I come back, whatever it takes, I'll borrow a car, I'll come with a friend, I'll rent a Cadillac, but I will come around the corner to where our house is. I'll stop, I'll go slow, I'll beep twice, and I'll flash our high beams. And when I flash my high beams and you hear the two beeps, you'll know it's me. You're gonna come out on the patio, on the porch, on the deck, be wearing the pink negligee I love. I will come in the house and we will pick up where we left off. There'll be no stoppage of our relationship or our love. And what happens next? Can you guess?
He dies in the war?
Killed. He killed in the war. We don't know if she finds this out. We don't know if she knows. We do know that if any car turns that corner in front of the house, and if they beep twice and they turn on their high beams, when she sees those brights, she comes out on that porch. And at this point, I thought that Ed DiPiazza had too much to drink or too much to smoke, or I don't know what, but he starts up his car. And he goes, we're going to visit the pink lady now. And we leave the bridge. We go about 4 blocks. And then we take this little sharp turn. And the neighborhood is not good. and it's not a place I would want to get stopped in or break down. But he then turns. He beeps twice. He flashes his high beams. And this specter, this figure, this what looked like a white face with no eyes, but a pink smock, pink negligee, walks out, looks at the car, and fades back into the house.
Ooh.
See, this is the truth. I experienced it. Ed experienced it. When I was writing the book, I remember. Now, I don't know if this was a suppressed memory because I didn't think of this. I didn't really remember this until it was time to write the book. And I remembered it vividly, the whole story, to the point that I wrote the chapter and sent it to Ed on Facebook. And he said, my God, I haven't thought about it since then. That's exactly how it happened. The next night, I went back with my parents, told them the story, beeped the horn, put on the brights, and she came out again 2 nights in a row.
Oh, wow.
Yep. A week later, I brought a car full of friends, boys, girls. I thought if I'd scare them, I'd get lucky. You know the word lucky. And we went around the corner. The same thing happened. And we never did it again till it was time to put out the book. And I went back to that neighborhood. I tried to find it. And the whole is all demolished. The buildings that were there. I want to tell you that on the 3rd night that I went with my friends, I looked across the street. I wanted to see if there was somebody who was projecting this, even though this was in a year that no one had projections. I thought somehow, maybe there is a scientific reason as to why after 2 beeps and 2 brights, maybe someone triggers, but she came out, the same way all 3 times. So is this a quirky story?
That's a quirky and rather creepy story.
And it's the truth verbatim because I experienced it, and I'm not brilliant enough to make up that good of a story.
Well, that's an awesome story. It really is. And I'm glad I didn't experience it because I'd be having nightmares. So, all right, last question for you today, Charles.
Yes.
You've already told us a bunch of things that are very useful and helpful for anyone that's trying to do what you've been doing for your whole career.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can share a piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to people who are starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to that next level.
I think last time I really pondered that a lot. And what hit me was, I overdo things. I want to, when I go out for an acting role, I overact. I think that if there's a director that can see that I can overact, he can pull it back. But if he sees another actor and that actor is like a lemon, a guy, blah, 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 you can't maybe make a better actor out of a lesser actor. And I think I've done that in everything I do. So if someone wants to hire me for a DJ, I want them to come see me at my craziest, knowing that they say, okay, we don't want you to dress up in a Sgt. Pepper outfit and play a Beatles song. I don't have to. But if they just see a DJ standing behind the booth and just pressing buttons, they're not. So I always say, give more, show more, present more. And then I think that will leave an impression. I went out for an acting role in January, and it was for a film where they were looking for a judge and mayor. And I read for the judge and I was loud. And at one point, he's supposed to get mad at the detectives, and I slam a book down and I scream at them and I get in their face. Now, no one else did that in the auditions, and I think that was impressive. I think it actually scared the director because he didn't expect that kind of a, over the top. But then I had to read for the mayor, and he was like a religious. He had been a pastor or something because it was, a Bible touting mayor. And the guy before me was he great? He had a James Earl Jones voice. It was like, my God, I am going to, the greatest voice. I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So there was another room. There was a podium. I wheeled in the podium. And I stood behind the podium as I felt a mayor might do. In the podium was a book. I lifted that book as if it was the Bible. And I spoke in that Southern voice. And I said, people. And I think that did the trick because I got the role. What am I getting at is, when I was in college and we did communication courses, people said, see who you love, see who writes the best, see who talks the best, see who's the best of this and that. And if you can emulate them, that's great. But you've heard this too many times, be yourself, because so much of it is bringing yourself. And myself is energy, and myself is personality, and myself is trying to make sure that everything I do, someone has a great time if they're on with me. And I think that if you can't teach that, but if someone can get a taste of that and realize that if they're just that same person in a line, they're that same person in a line, and that line will move down. But if they could stand out in any way, I mean, I'm only 5'5". I can't stand out by being 6'8". So I have to project, and I have to be high energy, and I have to not be loud, but be fun. And I think those are the things that have helped me in all the things I do, plus the fact that I love everything I do.
That's a big key, isn't it?
It's such a big key. And I think the two things you hear a lot is be yourself and be something you love, because if you love what you work, you'll never work a day in your life. But it's kind of true.
I think it's a real shame that you don't have any energy or personality.
I'm working on it.
But that's very wise advice. And it's advice that I have been given before in my life as well, where one time I went to audition for a role. This is many, many years ago. And I played it down the middle. And the director said, you have to give us something more than the middle. You have to take a chance. And if you don't get the part, you don't get the part. But you've taken a chance and shown them that you can take something out there into a very solid place. That's what you're talking about.
100%. I remember one thing I auditioned for, I think my first time auditioning in New York, and they said, bring a script with you. And everyone was bringing stuff from On the Waterfront. And I guess there are set things that you do when you do an audition that you read from. And I had a page from a comic book. It was a Swamp Thing or Man Thing, whatever. And he says how he was bullied as a child. And I remember the end of my audition, I looked straight into the casting director's eyes and I go, you were probably one of the ones who bullied me. And I turned around and walked out with disgust. And they called me back in and said, oh my God, that was the best reading I've ever heard. What is that from? Is that Tolstoy? Like, who wrote that? And I looked and I said, I don't know, John Romita, I don't know, some comic book artist. I didn't get the role.
But you showed them something.
But I intimidated them.
Well, I think that is exactly the way to do it. Charles Rosenay, this has been an absolutely fun hour on StoryBeat, and I can't thank you enough again for the second time, and perhaps we'll have you back again with another book if you put one out, and it would be terrific to see you again. And I can't thank you enough for spending your time, your energy, your wisdom, and just being you on today's show.
Thank you so much. I just want to leave with the website, which is www.bookoftop10, the number 10, not TEN, bookoftop10beatleslists.com. That's the website, and it's also, of course, on Amazon.
Well, that's fantastic, Charles, and I hope people go out and get it, because I've read both of your books, and I think they're both fantastic. They're a lot of fun to read, so I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I love being here, and I love you aside from the show, so thank you so much, Steve.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.